After releasing one of the best-selling debut albums ever, it was time for the Monkees' second album. The band hated it, but the fans didn't care. It was exactly what they wanted. It was more of the Monkees. I'm Andrew from Parlogram, and in this video I'll dive deep into this album to find out exactly what upset the band and why it became one of the best-selling pop albums of the 1960s. Timing is everything, and the Monkees' timing was impeccable. While the Beatles' music matured into pop art, the Monkees' debut album, released in December 1966, truly hit the spot with a new generation of pop fans. Eager to capitalize on that success, the Monkees' production company Screen Gems wanted another album out as soon as possible, which turned out to be this one. So now, let me take you through this album track by track and find out the stories behind the songs. As with the first album, all the musical backing tracks were played by session musicians. The music captured at those tracking sessions was then mixed down onto 1 or 2 tracks of a 4-track tape, leaving the others available for overdubs, which were recorded at a later session. On Monday, August 15th, 1966, the day before the release of the Monkees' debut single, Last Train to Clarksville, Monkees producers Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart gathered with their team of top session musicians at RCA Studio A on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood to record the backing track for the opening song on the album. Written by Boyce and Hart, who also wrote some of the most memorable tracks on their debut album, most notably Last Train to Clarksville and the Monkees' theme, She is a worthy album opener. Boyce and Hart had written this garage rock-inspired track approximately 6 months before the Monkees project came to fruition. They returned to the song on August the 27th at RCA Studio B, where Mickey Dolenz added his lead vocal. Mickey, Peter, Davey, along with Boyce and Hart, then contributed backing vocals. The tapes were then put on the shelf, ready for final mixing, which Boyce and Hart would carry out on September the 6th. Although it was never issued as a single, She did front this Australian 4-track EP in January 1968. Boyce and Hart also produced a version of She for their old friend Del Shannon, whose version would be issued on December the 20th, 1966, but ultimately failed to chart. The album's second track, written and produced by Neil Sedaka and Carol Bayer, was the final song recorded for the album on November the 23rd, 1966, this time at RCA Studio A in New York.
When love comes knocking at your door.
When Love Comes Knocking at Your Door uses Sedaka's trademark double tracking method. It was originally intended for the TV episode Monkees at the Movies. However, by the time that was due to air, A Little Bit Me, A Little Bit You had become the big hit, and When Love Comes Knocking was shown the door. The backing track to Sedaka's The Girl I Left Behind Me was also recorded on that day. But despite Kirshner's assurances to Sedaka that it would be featured on the next album, it didn't appear until it was included on Instant Replay in 1969. This ultimately resulted in Sedaka and Bayer losing a substantial amount in royalties.
Mary, Mary, where you going to?
Written and produced by Mike Nesmith, Mary Mary originated from the session at Western Recorders on the 25th of July. The same day, Boyce and Hart were recording the backing track for Last Train to Clarksville at RCA Studio B, just a few blocks away. Composed by Nesmith at his publisher's home, Mary Mary was first recorded by the Paul Butterfield Blues Band for their album East West, which was released in October 1966. The song kicks off with Hal Blaine's drums, which are backed up by other Wrecking Crew members, including James Burton, Glenn Campbell, Bob West, and even Peter Tork. Commencing at 8 p.m, the session continued until 1:15 midnight, as Nesmith strived to achieve the sound he desired. Although his methods created tension with the musicians, it resulted in a remarkably strong outcome, A reduction mix was then created on July the 27th at RCA Studio B, to which Mickey added his lead vocal. Hold On Girl, penned by producer Jack Keller, along with Ben Raleigh and Billy Carr, was the first of Davy Jones's signature tracks on this album. Dissatisfied with Boyce and Hart's original recording of this song from September the 10th, Keller produced a faster-paced version that featured a harpsichord and a 12-string guitar, to which Davy added his vocals on October the 15th. Keller was also involved as a writer and producer on the album's next track. Co-written with Diane Hildebrand, Your Auntie Griselda drew inspiration from Mick Jagger's performance on the recent Rolling Stones single, 19th Nervous Breakdown. The tracking session took place not at RCA, but at American Recording Studios in Studio City. This track was also the first on this album produced by Jeff Barry. Barry was a very experienced writer and producer. He and his songwriting colleague Ellie Greenwich had written some of the era's most memorable songs, so he knew what he was talking about when it came to producing hit records. Barry specifically chose Peter to sing lead on this, giving him his first lead vocal track.
I'm not your stepping stone.
I'm Not Your Stepping Stone, the final track on side 1 of the album, was first demoed by writers Boyce and Hart in November 1965. After that, Paul Revere and the Raiders recorded it in January 1966 for their album Midnight Ride. The song was featured in the romp segments of several episodes of the TV series and was also chosen as the B-side to their second single, which I'll get into later. With its easy-to-play chord changes and driving rhythm, it also became an anthem for garage bands around the country. The Sex Pistols even covered it, and they released it as a single in 1980. Look Out Here Comes Tomorrow opens up side 2 of the album and is the first of 2 songs on it written by Neil Diamond. Jeff Barry guided the musicians at RCA Studio B, which included Neil Diamond on acoustic guitar, through 18 tracks of the backing track, of which the final one was chosen as the master. During the vocal session the following Saturday, Barry, wanting to give Peter a more prominent vocal role on the album, overdubbed a version that included him giving a joke narration over the song's instrumental break.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the instrumental.
The experiment, however, didn't benefit the song and was swiftly abandoned. Nonetheless, the tape did survive and can be heard on later expanded editions of this album. The Kind of Girl I Could Love was Mike Nesmith's second writing and production credit on this album. Composed by Nesmith in collaboration with Roger Atkins, the backing track was recorded on June the 25th, with the same group of musicians who had played on Mary Mary. In a noble move to make his songs more of a group effort, Nesmith ensured that all 4 members contributed to the song's impressive 4-part harmony at the July 16th vocal session. The Day We Fall in Love is perhaps the perfect illustration of the commercial and creative differences that existed between the show's producer Don Kirshner and the band. Although this syrupy song never appeared in the TV show, it was certainly one that would have resonated with much of the group's younger female core audience. And while disliked by many, including the band, one can understand its inclusion on the album. Carole King, who co-wrote the album's next track, Sometime in the Morning, with partner Jerry Goffin, was in charge of the tracking session on October the 13th at RCA Studio A in New York. A few days later, on October the 25th, Carole King recorded a guide vocal using one of the free tracks of the 4-track tape to demonstrate to the Monkees and producer Jeff Barry how she envisioned the song being sung. This was something she frequently did with her songs, and some of those demos still exist, including the one she created for one of the Monkees' future hits, Pleasant Valley Sunday, a link to which can be found in the description. The album's penultimate track, Laugh, was written by The Tokens, who in 1961 had scored a huge worldwide hit with The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Don Kirshner was fond of both the song and the group, and placed this track on the album as a kind of charity gesture towards the group. The backing for the album's final track and the Monkees' second single was recorded at the same session as Look Out Here Comes Tomorrow on October the 15th at RCA's New York studio. I'm a Believer was written by Neil Diamond, who also played acoustic guitar during the session. The tracking session went smoothly, and take 18 was marked as the master. This was then shipped to Hollywood for the vocals to be added, which is where the trouble really began. The vocal overdub session for I'm a Believer took place on the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd of October at RCA Studio B in Hollywood, with Jeff Barry in the producer's chair. However, problems began even before the record button was pressed. Just before the session began, Nesmith decided to give Jeff Barry the benefit of his wisdom regarding some technical adjustments he thought Barry should make to the sound during the session. Being a man of considerable studio experience, Barry didn't take kindly to being told what to do by Nesmith, and he suggested Nesmith should just do his little job out in the studio and sing like a good little boy, and that he would produce the records. Surprisingly, Barry then allowed Nesmith to record the lead vocal track for I'm a Believer. This was probably nothing more than a ploy to pacify Nesmith, as Barry had no intention of using it on the final record. But Nesmith still wasn't happy and ended up walking out of the session, leaving Barry to focus on Mickey's vocal, which ended up on the release version. All of Nesmith's attempts were wiped. I'm a Believer, backed with I'm Not Your Stepping Stone, debuted on the Billboard Hot 100 on December the 10th, 1966, and a week later became their second #1 single. By the end of December 1966, the Monkees had begun touring and were giving live shows in front of 20,000 enthusiastic fans. Everyone was having a great time, even the skeptical Mike Nesmith. Although Mike and Davey were born 3 years apart, they share the same birthday, December 30th. And on that day in 1966, in Davey's suite at the Hilton in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, they both first saw a copy of More of the Monkees, and they were shocked at what they saw. In October 1966, the American department store chain J.C. Penney sent a memo to the Screen Gems merchandising department, suggesting that the Monkees wear their range of clothing on their next album cover. The following month, Bernard Yessin was sent to capture the group in J.C. Penney clothes, and, unknown to the Monkees, one shot was selected for the album cover. However, the cover was not the group's only issue with this album. In addition to his disappointment about the cover, Nesmith especially was more concerned with the quality of the music and his lack of involvement with it. He was even dismissive of his own 2 songs, saying that they were the worst on the album.
Strange man.
The cover photos also troubled Davey, and he felt embarrassed about the inclusion of the 2 songs he'd recorded alone in New York, of which the other band members had been unaware. Peter also disliked the cover, but directed most of his anger towards Don Kirshner. Firstly, for excluding them from the process, and second, for his self-congratulatory sleeve note, in which he praised himself for hiring all the musicians. Mickey's reaction, however, was more sanguine. He felt that, like the first album, this was a soundtrack album for the television show, and he viewed his participation in it as part of his job as an actor. However, the overwhelming feeling within the group was that they were now more determined than ever to demonstrate that they could succeed on their own terms, and vowed that things would be different with their next album. In contrast to the Monkey Mania in the States, the Monkees were still entirely unknown in the UK at this point, as the TV show would not premiere on the BBC until December the 31st, the same day as I'm a Believer was released as the band's debut single. The initial 100,000 pressing run sold out in just 8 days, and on the 25th of January it reached the #1 position on the official charts. It stayed there for 4 weeks, even surpassing sales of the Beatles single Strawberry Fields Forever Penny Lane. It was also a huge hit in many other countries around the world. More of the Monkees was not released in the UK until April the 7th. It then, for a couple of weeks, exchanged places at the top of the chart with the soundtrack to The Sound of Music, before everything was eclipsed by Sgt. Pepper's. Like their debut album, and indeed many pop albums from this era, More of the Monkees is arguably best appreciated in mono. However, since there are some variations in the mixes of certain songs, why not enjoy both? More of the Monkees went on to become the biggest selling album of their career. But was it their best? Well, for many, the follow-up, Headquarters, was better. And we'll be looking at that album next in this series. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on that. Once again, I'd like to thank Andrew Sandoval for his remarkable book, The Monkees' Day-by-Day Story. It truly is the definitive work on the group, which covers everything about them and their music from beginning to end. It's published by his own Beatleland Books, and if you'd like to buy one, there is a link in the description, and you can get $15 off by using the discount code Parlogram15. His company also publishes another splendid Monkees book, Smoke-Filled Dreams, which showcases the unseen photo archive of author and pop culture enthusiast Joe Russo. Finally, if you haven't done so already, why not take a look at our video about the Monkees' debut album? I'll be back next weekend with something completely different. But that's all for this time, so I'll say bye for now and thanks for watching.